Thank you. Good morning. I have to get my good morning, everyone. Is everyone okay in the back out there? Can you hear us just fine? I am honored and pleased to be here during my first trip to Trinidad. Beautiful country, beautiful people, great hospitality. So I want to thank you for this invitation. I want to thank Credi for inviting me to be here, and Dr. Farrell for being gracious enough to gather me from the airport and to spend some time with you. And I have a tough act to follow, following Dr. Bernard. Can we give him one final round of applause for a very, very powerful lesson? Thank you so much. I also want to thank you all for being here, because beautiful Saturday morning, there are a lot of other places that you could be, but you are here. You had to be here, or you want to be here, right? You want to be here, right? So thank you for being here and taking the time out to continue to expand your professional knowledge. Can I see by show of hands? I think I know, but by show of hands, how many folks here are actual educators? I believe most are educators. Most hands go up. Do we have folks here by show of hands who have been educated for more than 10 years? Can we give them a round of applause, please? Okay, thank you. How about folks who have been more than 20 years? Wow, give them a round of applause, please. Okay. How about more than 25 years? Can you stand up, please? 25-year folks, stand up, please. Stand up, stand up. 25 years, stand up, stand up. Okay, we're going to get into a little trouble here, but I'm going to keep going for a second, okay? How about folks who have 30, if you have 25 years or more, please stay up, okay? How about 30 years or more? Stay up. Wow. Thank you. How about 35 years? Well, give them a big round of applause. Okay, please stand up, please stand up. Don't sit down. How many years, please? 35. How many years? More than 40. She lost count after a while, right? How many years? 40. How many years? More than 40. We stopped counting after 40, right? How many years? 42. How many years? More than 40. Did I miss anybody? Dr. Bernard, how many? 51. Thank you all. It's important. It is important for us to acknowledge educators who have dedicated their lives to this work. This is hard work. It's difficult work. It's challenging work. It's taxing work. And for those who have given your lives to invest in other people's children, you need to be recognized, you need to be honored, and you need to be seen for the commitment that you've made. So I just need to say, we need to say thank you. You are jewels. You should be cherished, and we honor you every single day. Thank you one more time. Thank you. I have to do that every time before I speak, because when we talk about these issues that we talk about, I don't just study these issues because they're interesting. And I don't study these issues because they're intriguing to me. And I don't study these issues because they sound like they're the topic of the day. When I study these issues around young people, I study them because they're personal for me. They are personal for me because when I think about my upbringing, all of the risk factors that tend to be placed on young people were placed on me. My mother was 18 years old when she had me. She was a single parent, poor neighborhood, drugs, crime. And so we know what happens with young boys, black boys, who are raised with those kinds of situations. The likelihood was better that I would end up dead or in jail than I would graduate from high school. So when I think about what I have been fortunate enough to experience in my life professionally, I understand that it's not because of something special that I did. I understand first and foremost it's because of the grace of God and what God has done for me, number one. But I also understand that it's a lot of caring adults who invested in me, a lot of teachers who never stopped believing in me, a lot of adults who said you can and you will be something bigger and better. So I always have to give homage to educators because educators made a difference in my life. Adults made a difference in my life. So when I talk about these issues, I have a passion about it because it's emotional for me. And it's personal for me because unfortunately, I have lost too many friends along this journey. Too many young people who had unlimited potential who never got to see it come to fruition, who had lost their lives to a lot of senselessness that you all see happening here in Trinidad that we see in the States. So when I talk about these issues, I say we have to act, and we have to act with intensity because in many ways we have lives that hang in the balance, lives that will not be fulfilled unless we do something immediately. Many of you, I'm sure, came from very difficult circumstances, but you are here because of what others sacrificed for you to be here today. And so because you are here now, we have a responsibility. And I want to talk to you today about that responsibility that we have. And that responsibility has to be, how do we save lives? And I don't say that in a really sort of popular culture kind of way. I say that in a real sense because there are lives that are hanging in the balance as we speak unless we do something. There are young people who will not be here a year from now if we don't do something more immediate. And so I'm going to talk you through how we have to think about this work, some of the challenges that we see in the U.S., very similar to what you see here in Trinidad, and how we can begin to think, work, and act collaboratively to begin to address those issues. Now, part of what I oftentimes say is that we have two different Americas. And one of the ways in which this story gets told is that America is this great land of opportunity. As one immigrant told me some time ago, he was told that the streets were paved with gold. I said, that's not the America I know. Right? There's two different Americas. There's one where there are the haves, where there are safe communities, good schools, lots of wealth, people who don't think about these issues that we're talking about here today. And they live a very different kind of reality, one where they don't have to understand some of the challenges that we face every single day. That's one America. That's the have. But then there's another America that's called the have-nots, and that's the America that I know. That's the America that I grew up in. That's the America that I still work hard for every single day to help it to become a better place. And in that have-not America, it's a very different kind of a place. It's a place where possibilities of hope are oftentimes diminished. It's a place where people's outlook on the future is severely compromised. It's a place where young people don't even know if they'll live to see the age of 21 oftentimes. It's a place where when young people who are angry, who are hopeless, and who are living in despair have no regard, as I talked to Dr. Bernard about, for human life. And anytime you live in any kind of situation where young people have no hope and no regard for human life, it's a recipe for disaster. And in this America of have-nots and on all other parts of the world where we have have-nots, we have a real pressing problem on our hands. And that pressing problem is that young people feel as if we have given up on them, that we have turned our backs on them. And the painful part we have to acknowledge here today is in some ways we have. And so what we have to think about is how do we double down our efforts to ensure that the young people who have gotten upset with us, frustrated with us, who feel like we have turned our backs on them, we have to let them know that there are individuals out there who still believe in them, who still believe that they can reach their full potential. So what about these two different Americas, the have and have-nots? Part of what the issue is, and Dr. Bernard talked about this, we have a real wealth gap. We are the wealthiest, some of the wealthiest countries in the world, but we don't have everyone able to participate in that wealth. You see here in America, if you see that red part of the pie chart there, we have the top 1% of the country own 33% of the country's wealth. Unacceptable. The next 4% own 26% of the wealth. So if we stopped our analysis right there, what it tells us is that the top 5% of wage earners in America own or control almost 60% of the country's wealth. The top 5%. So that's that have I talked about, right? How does 5% of the country control 60% of its wealth? That means the other 95% is left to fight for the final 40%. So we are constantly fighting in the second America to try to get access to crumbs, not realizing that the bigger pie is the one where we have 5% of the people own 60% of the wealth. So part of what I have to tell young people about is that when we have this conflict amongst each other, it's the poor fighting the poor, right? The have-nots fighting the have-nots. there's a bigger set of issues we should be confronting, and it's this one right here, when you have the kind of wealth distribution where you have so many people with so little, and you have so few people with so much wealth that they would never be able to spend it in 10 lifetimes. But part of what we have to recognize is that the folks who have the wealth believe that they got the wealth the honest way. They believe that they got the wealth in a fair way. They believe that this has happened because they did things in ways that those who don't have did not. And part of what we have to help our young people to understand is that historically there has been a narrative which tells us that those who don't have, oftentimes, don't have because those who have exploited and taken full advantage and misled and miseducated in ways that has led to this disproportionality of wealth and resources. That's the story we have to tell our young people who don't have. Don't shoot and kill your brother and sister who's also in the same kind of pain as you are. What we have to do is find ways to educate those young folks to understand that the real crooks in my country are in Wall Street, right? The real crooks are the individuals who don't think about how people are suffering, people who are going without food, people who don't have homes every single day, but yet we blame them for their circumstances. That's the real battle we should be fighting. We should not be battling the fight amongst ourselves. So I want to walk you through some of the challenges that we see in our schools and how we can begin to fix them, okay? One of my favorite theorists of all time, W.E.B. Du Bois, talked about the fact that the Negro race, like all races, is going to be saved by its exceptional men. I would also put in there, and women. So this was back in 1903. So Du Bois needed to think about women also playing a key role too. So you with me, women? He said the problem of education among Negroes must first of all deal with the talented tenth. Who was this talented tenth that Du Bois was referring to? It is those of us in this room who have had options to get education, access to opportunity. We are the talented tenth, and Du Bois's idea was that the talented tenth would be responsible for helping to uplift the 90% who did not have the opportunities that the talented tenth had. But the question we have to ask ourselves is that have we as the talented tenth done our duty or have we turned our back? Again, the talented tenth, those of us who have been able to overcome obstacles, navigate setbacks, find our ways around loopholes, have we helped those who have not had that same opportunities or have we turned our back? I want to believe that we have not turned our back, but our young people are telling us a different story. They are telling us every single day that they believe that many of us have turned our backs against them. And because they feel as if we have turned our backs against them, they are creating some very difficult circumstances in which we oftentimes live and work in every single day. How do we respond? I want to begin to walk you through some of the challenges we have. I want to give you a snapshot of what classrooms in the United States look like, okay? But this is not just a typical classroom. These are classrooms in what are called urban areas, urban fringes, as Dr. Bernard talked about. And this is the America that we don't want to talk about, that we need to acknowledge, because the reality is this, that America is changing, I tell people. America is changing where our country is becoming more of the have-nots than it is of the haves. That's why if we don't respond to those who are in need, the entire country will be in peril. I would raise the same set of concerns here for you in Trinidad. If we don't help those at the bottom, we run the risk of having our entire nation suffer. So I want to give you a snapshot, okay? If we took just urban schools in America, just urban communities, and we shrunk those schools down to a classroom of 30. I have my students back at UCLA. We bring the data together and we look at what these numbers look like across the board. So I want to give you a classroom of 30 and tell me if this sounds very familiar to what you see in your urban fringes, because I maintain that oftentimes we're dealing with the same problems just in different parts of the world. That's why it's important for us to think collaboratively, share ideas, share solutions to help find ways to make the situation better. So let me walk you through our classroom, our urban classroom in the United States, and tell me if you don't think you deal with the same kinds of issues. So what we know is that of our 30 students, 22 of them would live in poverty. I maintain poverty is the hardest thing to conquer and makes it difficult to educate our young people. Difficult, but not impossible, because if it were impossible, I would not be standing right here before you today. Many of you would not be here today, right? But part of the challenge is that we have many teachers who believe that because young people are poor, they cannot be educated. Say that one more time. Many educators believe that if you are poor, you cannot learn. I would argue quite to the contrary. I maintain when you grow up poor, you develop another way of survival. When you're poor, you learn how to navigate when there's no way. When you're poor, you see the world in a very different way. I maintain in some ways being poor, you have a sixth sense, you have an extra set of intelligence because you have to learn how to survive. Do not tell me poor people cannot learn. I reject that outright because that's personal for me. If poor people cannot learn, I would not be here. I say that all the time. The children that you all serve, poor children, are fully capable of being architects, engineers, physicians, if we believe in their potential to be something bigger than what they are. The biggest challenge we have is the belief system of the adults who interact with young people. Our children will rise up or live down to whatever expectations we have for them. If we tell them we don't think they can learn because they are poor, guess what's going to happen? They will not learn. If we tell them we believe that they can be successful, guess what will happen? They will be successful. My mother told my brother and I every single day, you will go to college. Every day she said that. I didn't know what college was. My mother never went to college. But she said, when you go to college, when you go to college, when you go to college. Okay, Mom, enough already about this college thing. But she said that because she had a belief in what she thought my brother and I could become. And when you hear somebody who believes in you every single day, telling you what is possible, telling you what you will do, you start to internalize it. You start to believe it. You start to act accordingly. So what you've got to do, educators, is talk to your young people every single day and tell them what is possible. Tell them what they will become. Tell them what you expect of them. And believe that. Do it with your own children. Tell them what they will become. So part of what we see now is that 22 out of the 30 students in our schools in America will live in poverty, okay? Big challenge. That means these children oftentimes come to school without food that they've had that morning for breakfast. Some of them didn't have dinner the previous night. How do we expect to teach children if they're hungry, if they're irritable? But also what we know is that 5 of those 22 will live in what's considered extreme poverty. We have levels of poverty, right? Poverty is one thing, but there are some people who are struggling just to make ends meet in the worst way. Okay? We need to be empathetic and caring and recognize what this means. In our classroom of 30, we also know in the United States we have a big language problem. 2 out of 3 would not speak the primary language. They would speak one of the more than 150 languages spoken in the United States. We cannot effectively educate students if we cannot communicate with them. Right? So language support needs to be a big part of what we do. But what we tend to think is if you don't speak the Queen's English the proper way, you must be less intelligent. Again, big mistake. I think that individuals who speak multiple languages are some of our smartest children in our schools. We should have all of our children speaking multiple languages. What we do is we take the language away. If a child does not speak English as his or first language, we say, get rid of that language. You should only speak English here in this country. Criminal. Language is a part of who we are. Language is a part of our identity. When you outright reject the child's language, you are outright rejecting who he or she is. And many young people in America say, if I don't want to use your language, I should not have to, and are resisting schools because of that. What we also know is that 10 of the 30 students would not be raised by their biological parents, but we see a growing number of children being raised by aunts, uncles, grandparents, great-grandparents, foster parents who are in the foster system. I met a woman just about 6 months ago, 92 years old, raising her great-great-great-grandchildren. We have to understand the set of circumstances our young people are dealing with in their homes. We have children who are not even in the same household as their biological mothers and fathers. We have to be sensitive to those sets of circumstances. And the numbers are going up even higher. What we also know in this classroom of 30 is that 5 of the 30 students would be homeless. I know you all probably see this here. We see it in the States as well. Young people who are living on the streets, living in cars, living in shelters, coming to school 4 or 5 days in a row with the same set of clothes on, no food to have eaten. We have to have some sense of empathy and social justice and recognize that when you've got young people who are homeless, that their education is going to look very different. I was in a school just 2 months ago. A teacher told her students, I need you all to go home. Find a quiet, well-lit place in your home and study for 2 hours. Some of the students looked at her like, what is she talking about? Quiet, well-lit place? That does not exist for many students in this other America. In this other America, there are young people who are struggling, scrapping for ways in which they can find a meal. I look at it in the cafeteria. I see some small kids during lunchtime. They not only eat their lunch, but they're also taking other food for later, right? Let me have your milk. Can I have your orange? Let me have your sandwich. These are smart kids who are trying to survive. Think about it for a second. How would we feel in this room if we had to go 4 hours without any food? We'd be ready to fight somebody, wouldn't we, right? We'd be angry. We'd be irritable. This is what our young people oftentimes deal with, not for 4 hours, sometimes for 8, 12, 16, 24 hours. We talk to young people who say oftentimes they have nothing to eat since the prior day's lunch at the school. So this is the other America we have to be sensitive to and sympathetic to. What we also know is that 10 of our 30 students would have some kind of mental health issue. We don't talk about mental health challenges or signs of post-traumatic stress syndrome disorder. Kids who have not been treated for mental health, kids who come to school angry, kids who come to school depressed, kids who have anxiety. This is what you are seeing, I'm sure, in your schools. We cannot help our kids do well on tests if they are not well mentally and physically. So we have to show concern with our whole children, not just in terms of their academic performance. And here's the one that we don't talk about, but it's disturbing. What we know is that 7 of our 30 students will be victims of some type of physical, sexual, verbal, or emotional abuse before they turn 18. And these are the stories that get really, really depressing to me because we see them happen. We talk to social workers. I was in a school just last week, young girl, 11 years old. Her 3 younger siblings live with her mother. Mother finds a boyfriend. Mother moves the boyfriend into the apartment. Boyfriend doesn't work. Boyfriend says, I'll help you take care of the kids. Right? You all know where this story's going. Boyfriend begins to start sexually molesting the 11-year-old child. Tells her she better not say a word to her mother because if she does, he will harm her and her mother. So for a full year, this young 11-year-old child is being sexually molested by her mother's boyfriend. This child is showing up to school every day, violated, hurt, a shell of herself, not telling anybody about what has happened. She finally musters up the courage to tell her mother what the mother's boyfriend has been doing, and guess what mom says? She doesn't believe it. And because you are trying to come between me and my boyfriend, I'm putting you out of the house. 11-year-old child now who is homeless and a victim of sexual abuse. This happens far more commonly than we want to talk about. And we wonder why children are angry. We wonder why they're withdrawn. We wonder why they're overly promiscuous. We wonder why they show the kinds of behaviors that they show because we have children that we have turned our backs on. And this happens far too often. Many of you probably work in schools with children who have these same types of circumstances. Part of what I would argue or ask you to do, beg for you to do, plead for you to do, talk to your children, talk to your students, get into their business, ask them about home life. We get children who come to school with big bruises on their heads, black eyes. What happened? Parents are oftentimes angry, frustrated, and don't know how to adequately cope with their challenges, so their kids become their targets. We have to behave and act in ways where we help children recognize that there are caring adults that want to see them thrive. We cannot get to any kind of testing results or academic outcomes until we deal with these kinds of data. This is about the humanistic component of what we deal with education. We have human beings who come to our buildings every day, not robots. If we do not care and love for them as human beings, everything else we do doesn't matter. Famous psychologist in the States Abraham Maslow says that we have what's called a hierarchy of needs. And Maslow maintained that you cannot get to higher order learning. You cannot get to what happens in the brain until people feel safe, until young people feel cared for, until people have their most basic physiological needs met. We have young people who walk into our schools who do not have those basic needs met, and we expect them to read and do math and do algebra and do science. And when they tell us that they don't want to, we blame them. And we wonder why they are angry with us. Okay? Make sense to folks? Sounding familiar? Okay. Stay with me. So now, when all this happens, we have a big dropout, or I call a push-out issue in our country. I'm not going to walk you through all the data, but what we see is that you look at Black, Hispanic, and American Indian, they have the highest dropout rates or push-out rates in our country. I maintain that we set up schools in such a way, we tell these young people that we don't care about you. We don't care about you. We're going to put you in schools that are overcrowded, give you less than qualified teachers, give you a curriculum that's not relevant or engaging, and then when you say you don't want to do it, we say, well, it's your problem, so why don't you leave? And we push these children out. And the worst numbers are with our Black, Hispanic, and American Indian boys. Because boys come to school needing to be stimulated, and we do just the opposite. We bore them to tears. We bore them to tears. We tell them that they can't learn, that they won't learn. Dr. Bernard and I talked about this. His slide earlier I thought was appropriate from Einstein, where you have the fish believe that the fish cannot climb the tree, so the fish thinks something's wrong with him or her. Same thing we do in the States, this other America. We tell young Black and brown boys that they're not as successful, they're not as smart, they're not as capable. There's a wonderful book by an author called Herbert Cohn called I Won't Learn From You. And what Herbert Cole did was he followed and talked to, much like Dr. Bernard did, he followed these young men. And he said, why don't you perform in school? And he said that we choose not to learn from teachers who don't respect us. We don't want to learn from these people because they don't understand where we come from. They don't honor us. They don't validate us. They don't affirm us. And then some of them said, not only will I not learn from you, but some of them said that they go so as far as to say, I will sabotage this entire classroom so that nobody can learn from you. How many of us have had that young man in our classroom who goes out of his way to make it a terrible learning environment for everyone? Very smart kids who can do some destructive things, okay? Now, when we don't train them, here's where they end up. Dr. Bernard, you talked about these young men coming to our schools with their pants hanging down, right? This is the message that they get. Here's their college. In the United States, what we do is we push Black and brown boys out and say, we don't have a place for you here in school. But what we have done in America is we have created an industry of incarceration. It's one of the fastest growing segments of our economy, prison construction. There is profit now in building prisons, profits now in incarcerating young people. And this is what we have to help our young people understand, that if they don't get education right, this is a place where we put them. We spend more to incarcerate. We spend in the United States, we spend about $30,000 per year per inmate, and about $10,000 per year per pupil. So per individual, we spend more to incarcerate than to educate. And in some states in the U.S., what we have done is they look at test scores in the primary school to begin to project how many prison beds they're going to need in the next 10 years. This is their college. This is why we've got to respond. This is why the talented 10th has got to do something different. Because what we're currently doing now is not working. My grandmother always said a sign of insanity is to do what? Same thing over and over, but expect a different outcome. We're doing the same thing over and over, yet we're expecting something different to happen, and we're surprised when it doesn't. And our young people are telling us they have some very backwards ways of thinking about masculinity. My manhood is defined, Dr. Bernard knows about this, right? My manhood is defined by how I treat women in a very disrespectful way. The music that our young people listen to, the misogyny, the hatred towards women. Killing people is considered a sport. How many children can I have and not take care of them? This is the notion of what our young people are getting around what masculinity is all about. That's why we need men to step up in our communities. I'll say it one more time. We need men to step up. You know, I have to say this, and some of my men may be upset, but it just needs to be said because our women have served as the backbone of our families and communities for a very long time. And our women are trying to do everything in their powers to help hold our families together. But I maintain, at the end of the day, it's going to take men to show boys how to become men. That's why I make a plea to men, fathers. Look, you've got to mentor young boys. You cannot become something that you don't see. How do I become a man if I've never seen a man every single day? Get up in the morning, go to work, hold a job, treat his family with decency, treat a woman with respect and love and care. If our young boys don't see that, they cannot be that. So part of what we do in the States, we have these Real Men Read programs where we bring men from the community and they go into schools and just talk to young boys. You'd be amazed. Sometimes these young men don't have a male to talk to. And so that's why the gangs become so attractive to them, because in gangs they have other males who will talk to them, other males who will care for them, other males who will support them. We need to create gangs of strong men who are fathers, grandfathers, uncles. We need men to help boys become men. And it's not just men to do this for boys, but I maintain some of our young girls also need to have examples of what good manhood is all about. Because what happens is when our young girls come up and they don't see examples of manhood, they accept any kind of behavior as being okay. If this is your example of what men look like, that's what you will aspire to look for. If you think it's okay for men to abuse you because your mother and your grandmother were physically abused, you think this is what I'm supposed to do. It's okay to be abused. It's okay to be talked down to. No, it's not. We've got to tell our young girls that is inappropriate and unacceptable. But when it's become normalized, you expect it to happen on a regular basis. So we have both our boys and our girls completely confused and turned around about notions of masculinity, notions of femininity, and they have some distorted ways of how they play out their maleness and their femaleness. We have got to do better. That's not their fault. That is us. We've allowed music and popular culture to kind of take them in a direction that is so troublesome that I don't know how we get it back. But I believe folks in this room have got to play a role to make that a better situation. Because this should not be their other college. This should not be the examples of manhood that we look at. So, how do we fix this? I think we have to have homes, communities, and schools all play a role. These three components can fix this. Can't happen with just schools. Schools cannot do it alone. I'm sorry, folks, but we cannot. Home cannot do it alone because home can do everything that it's supposed to do, but if schools and communities don't play their role, we will still fall short. We have to have a partnership between what happens at home, what happens in communities, and what happens in schools to get this right. How do we know that this works? Because it worked for all of us in this room. If I were to go around this room right now, I bet you each and every one of you would tell me, I am here because somebody at home put me on a solid foundation first and foremost, right? Most of you would tell me somebody at home made a difference. Then you would tell me somewhere along the line, there was someone in your community who also made a difference. Other role models, coaches, adults, mentors. And then if I kept asking you the question, you would also tell me there was somebody probably in your school who made a difference. And all these caring adults together working for the same goal can help make people whole. So I want to walk you through, in the brief time that I have, what needs to happen in each of these areas to help us get us on the right track. Let me start with where I think the most important part of this process has to happen, which is in the home. It is where our children start learning first. What we do at home sets the foundation for everything else. And there are some painful conversations that we need to have with parents about what they are doing and what they are not doing in their homes. It's hard to expect educators to do their jobs when parents have not done theirs. I talk to people in schools all the time, and I see parents who are angry with teachers, upset with teachers. Teacher didn't do this. Teacher didn't do that. And I say, well, tell me what you have done as the parent. Then it gets quiet. So part of what we have to help our parents understand is that they are their children's first teachers. They have a responsibility to provide a foundation to teach what is acceptable behavior. Sometimes when I see young people in schools, I'm wondering, who raised you, child? What happened? So let's have this painful conversation about what parents must do. Okay, first and foremost, doesn't matter how much money you make to be a good parent. It's not the family composition, it's the parent disposition that makes the biggest difference in raising children. Again, many of us, like myself, was raised in a poor household, but my mother did not make poverty an excuse for why she could not teach me proper skills and proper ways of acting and behaving. So because people are poor does not mean they cannot learn how to act. So I tell parents all the time, it may not matter your income, but what you do in that household matters. How you tell people, how your young adults, how your young children, how to speak to adults. Yes, sir. No, sir. Please, thank you. Soft skills make a difference. I'm just oftentimes appalled by the way that young people have no regard or no respect for adults. Okay? So again, it's not the composition, it's the disposition. What do you teach? What are the values? What are the ideas that are being stressed from day one? I watch the way I see young people today, children talk back to their parents, and I am shocked. When I was 7 or 8 years old, if I ever thought about speaking back to my mother, it was not going to be a good situation. You all know what I'm talking about. If I thought about saying something back to my mother, I'd be picking up my teeth off the floor. You did not speak back to your mother in a disrespectful way. But we have lost that. Part of the reason why we've lost that, and you all know, we've got young people raising young people. Parents at 14, 15 years old. But even with that, we still have got to be responsible for helping to mentor young parents as to how they can be more responsible parents. Okay? So it's not the composition. So what do these factors include? Parents have got to put their children's growth ahead of their own. That's a hard one to do. But what we have to tell our parents is that, look, you have to put your child and his or her needs before your own. Far too many parents still think, I want to go out and have a good time. I've got a young cousin right now. She's 17 years old, just had a little boy. I said, guess what, sweetheart? Your life has changed forever because now your son comes first. You can't go hang out with your friends. Why? Because you've got a child to raise. No, I'm not babysitting. Right? Part of what we have to help young people understand, you've got to put your child before you. Everything that you do now is for someone else. Okay? You all know this. How many parents I have out here today? Right? You all know, right? Your needs and wants no longer matter, do they? No, you go without. You got broken down shoes. You're wearing the same clothes for years because you're doing what? For these children. Because you have put your children first, and that's the way it should be. They didn't ask to be here. We have a responsibility to make sure that we do everything to put them first. Second, look, parents, we have to help them understand schools cannot do and teach everything to their children. Many parents think that it's just my responsibility to get the child to school. Once the child is at school, you all will take care of everything else. That is the old way of thinking about education. Education starts at home. What are you doing in the household to help that child develop literacy skills? What are you doing at home to help that child learn counting, shapes, sizes, colors? These are things that should be happening before a child starts primary school. Some parents think once the child goes to school, I have no responsibility, let him do his homework there, let her do her homework there. When they come home, I don't want to deal with it. Can't do that. I tell parents, you guys are in school together. Child and parents in school together, okay? What we also know, parents who believe that children are personally responsible have to understand at some point you have to have your son or daughter take responsibility for their own learning. Tell children, this is about your future. I want something bigger and better for you. How can it become a reality? High expectation, changing what we do. The music, part of what we have to help our parents understand is that you all know children are sponges. They pick up on everything that we say and do as parents. And we spend all of our time on the cell phone. What will our children expect to do? Same thing. If we never pick up a book to read, what would our children do? Never pick up a book to read. They watch everything that we do. Okay? And part of what we have to do, and this is what my mother did that was big for my brother and I, she oftentimes said that she wanted us to go farther in life than where she went. Say that again. She expected us to pursue goals that would put us farther than where she went. That's what we all want for our children. I want my children to have it better than I did. I want my children to have more education than I have. I want my children to have more income than I have. So part of what we have to talk to our parents about is that you should be putting your children on a course to have more than what you've had. That's why you sacrifice. Okay? So these are painful conversations that we have to have, but they're necessary. Now here's one that I have with my parents, and it gets real ugly sometimes. Because what I maintain, one of the biggest issues we have is around television watching in our households. I tell people all the time, children do what they see us do. And one of the biggest problems that we have in the States, and I think it's a global phenomenon where there is Western influence, is TV. There was a study that was done by Educational Testing Service 2 years ago. Looked at television watching across the 4 major groups we have in the United States: Asian, white, Latino, and black. Who do you think watched the least amount of television on average per week? You guys are good. Asians. According to this study, Asians watched on average 7 hours of television per week. Guess who had the highest test scores in the United States? Asians, right? There's a direct connection. The less TV you watch, the better you do in schools. Who do you think watched the second least amount of television? You guys are good. You know all the answers. Whites had an average of about 10 hours per week. That's a little bit more than an hour a day. Okay? Who do you think was next? Black? No, hold on. Latinos were next. 35 hours of television per week. How many hours is that per day? Like 5 hours per day. Should I go on to the next slide? Or do we want to keep going? So, ETS looked at this and they said, look, what group watches the most amount of television on average per week? Black students, 42 and a half hours of television per week. Folks, that's a full-time job. Okay? And there's a direct connection. When you look at this chart here, the groups who watched the least amount of television did the best in schools. The group that watched the most TV did the poorest in schools. So what do I tell my parents that I work with back in the U.S.? Turn off the TV. Turn off the TV. Parents say, well, what am I going to do then? Talk to your children. Read to your children. Figure something out, but turn off the TV. Put down the cell phone. This is about our investment in our children. If our children see us watching TV 40 hours a week, guess what they're going to do? Absolutely. And part of what we know is that there's so much garbage on TV. This is where these messages come about how they are supposed to manifest their masculinity. So these are things that we need to have happen at home. Parents have got to do better. We as educators need to push and challenge our parents to be better parents. If they are better parents, it makes our jobs as educators easier. Okay? And now we don't say this in a way where we blame parents. I don't believe we blame parents. We have to work to help support parents. Oftentimes, 99% of the parents want to do better, but many times they don't know how to do better. When people know better, they do better. So it's about parenting skills that we should be teaching, right? Proper nutrition, having conversations with young people. Don't let them roam the streets. I am always intrigued when I'm in Los Angeles at 9 and 10 o'clock at night sometimes, and I see young people on the streets. Where are you going? Why are you out? My mother had a rule. The minute the street lights came on, we had to be in the house. In the house. There was no explaining why we weren't in the house. There was no, well, what had happened was, none of that, right? You had to be in the house. If not, you had to pay the price. Okay? But let me carry on. So, What needs to happen in schools? So I talked about home. I want to talk about schools now because schools have a role. What should schools be doing? We had to have leadership. Dr. Bernard talked about it. What we see in schools that are effective in the U.S. is that they have strong leadership. Principals who make a difference. Principals who make sure that in their schools we will not accept failure, right? We have cases of schools where there are high degrees of success with low-income children. Why does it happen? Because you have strong leadership, principals who take no nonsense, who hire no-nonsense teachers, who hire no-nonsense staff, who hire no-nonsense aides. I said we should call them the no-nonsense schools because they have an expectation that in these buildings we will do something different. We have leaders who have the same kind of mentality like my 5th grade teacher, Miss Russell, who told us every single day, in my classroom, you will learn. If you don't learn, that means I have not taught you. Those are the kind of teachers and leaders we need to have in our schools. Every single day, Miss Russell would make us come up to her desk and bring her our homework. And you had to stand right there while she looked at your homework. And she wore those glasses that kind of came down on her nose like this, and she would look at the homework. She would look at you, and she'd look at the homework, and she'd look at you, and if the homework was not done to her satisfaction, guess what she did to it? She ripped it up and said, do it over, because I expect nothing less than your personal best. No nonsense teacher. See, what I didn't realize and what my classmates didn't realize, Miss Russell had a belief in us that we didn't know she had. She said, you will be successful because I'm going to push you till you can't stand me anymore. We need those kind of teachers in schools. I see too many teachers who want to be nice, who want to be friendly. That's not your job to be friends with your students. Your job is to teach your students, to educate your students, to hold them accountable, to have high expectations. Those are the kind of educators we need in our schools, okay? And so what does that look like? A transformation where we start to alter the beliefs, the attitudes, and values of the people who are in the school. This is where leadership comes into place. If there's somebody who does not believe in your vision, they have to go. They have to go. All it takes is one person who's not believing who makes the whole school less than it should be. And you all know who some of these people are. If I were to go around this room right now, you know some people who should not be working at your schools. Don't say their names, but you know who they are, right? They have no business. And here's my litmus test. I say this all the time. The litmus test is, do you give other people's children the same time, commitment, energy, and efforts you expect to be given to your own children? And some of our colleagues do not. If it's not good enough for your children, then it should not be good enough for anyone's children. You can clap for it. We can say it. We have to start calling people to the carpet. There are people who are doing this work who are just going through the motions, who don't care about our children, who believe that failure is just normal, that not learning is just acceptable. We have to get those folks out of this profession, out of this work, because they're taking away all the hard work that you all are doing. So what does that mean? We have sympathetic and we have empathetic teachers. I talk about this all the time. We need more empathetic teachers and less sympathetic teachers. Sympathetic teachers are individuals who feel sorry for students because they're poor. Don't feel sorry for these students. That's not going to help somebody change their circumstance because you feel sorry for me. I would not be here today if somebody felt sorry for my circumstance. So please don't feel sorry for students. Because when you feel sorry for me, then you start to lower the expectations. You think because he's poor, because he's raised in a single-parent household, he must not be as capable as other students. Don't believe that, okay? When you start to lower expectations for students, you don't challenge them, right? So academically, students can't be the best they can become because you don't challenge them, because you feel sorry for them, because you've lowered the expectations for them. This is what Haberman calls, and Dr. Bernard talked about, this is a pedagogy of poverty. Because kids are poor, we lower expectations, we just give them busy work to do, we don't challenge them, they kind of come in, they can act any kind of way, we don't have any kinds of accountability structures in place. This is the worst thing we can do for students. Children who grow up poor do not benefit from having this. This is what sympathetic teachers do. I maintain that we have sympathetic teachers in all schools across this globe. And we need to find a way to either get them up to speed or get them out of the classrooms. Okay? Now, I maintain we need to have empathetic teachers, okay? Empathetic teachers on the flip side see kids who come from impoverished circumstances and they see the potential that exists. They see the promise that's there. They see the intelligence that these students have. They say poverty does not hold you back. Poverty is just a temporary set of circumstances that you are going to overcome, okay? So what empathetic teachers do is they listen and learn from students. Our students are trying to talk to us every single day to help us to understand their circumstance. The question is, are we willing to listen? Okay? Yes, children have some difficult circumstances. Yes, children are going through some hard times. But it's our goal to listen and learn from them. But then once we listen and learn, we don't lower the expectation. We say, you still have got to get the work done. I'm still going to support you to do what you've got to do to be successful. Student culture matters. Experiences matter. Our students don't know their history and their culture and their background. Empathetic teachers learn and understand students' culture and background, and they do not look down upon it. They embrace it. They celebrate it. They understand that students come with lots of experiences, lots of ways of knowing, lots of ways of thinking. It's our job as educators to find out what those cultural experiences are and learn from them. Students will learn when they can learn from things that are related to where they come from. Okay? Empathetic teachers also hold students accountable to rigor, okay? My 5th grade teacher, Ms. Russell, said, I understand that you're poor. I understand that you may not have had all the things you would like, but guess what? Here, I can't feel sorry for you. Here, I still have got to push you. The way you change your circumstances in life is by doing the things that we're doing here in this classroom. I'm going to hold you accountable. If you do something that's not acceptable, I'm going to tell you about it and explain to you why you can do it better. You give me work that's not optimal, you're going to tear it up and do it over again. You're going to work together, help each other learn. These were all the messages that we got every single day from her. Okay? And she expected and she demanded excellence. That's what we've got to do. In our classrooms, what we have stopped doing is demanding excellence. If we expect our students to be excellent, we have to be excellent as educators. That means we have to come in prepared. We have to plan. We have to think. We have to have lessons that are in place. We have to have assessment that's going to be relevant. We have to have supports in place for some of our students who are behind grade level. All those things require us to be excellent. If we expect our students to be excellent, we should be excellent. Okay? And then we develop critical and complex teaching practices to engage students. Who tells me that poor kids cannot think critically? I maintain living poor, you're thinking critically every single day. Every single day you got to think critically. Where's my next meal coming from? What neighborhood should I avoid? Right? That's critical thinking. What happens if somebody comes up for me and asks me where my money is or give them money? That's critical thinking. I grew up in a neighborhood, gangs and drugs were all around me and my brother. You had to think critically in the spot. It might cost you your life. That's what our young people have to deal with today. That's critical thinking. Don't tell me these young people can't think critically because they do it all the time in order to survive. Okay? Now, so that means the way we train our teachers, look, you got to know your content knowledge. I'm not going to go through it. You got to know how to teach, right? I go into classrooms, the same old boring lecture every single day, and then you wonder why kids are bored out of their minds. Engage our children. Hands-on activities. Pair share. Work in groups. Our kids love to debate. So you're going to do a Socratic seminar. You're going to debate a point. You're going to read a text. Tell me what you think, right? So it's not only what you teach, but how you teach. This third point, infusing technology in the curriculum. We have kids who live in a social media age. They're constantly talking about all these different gadgets. Use technology to help them think and learn. That's the world we live in today. Kids want to engage in technology. So, right, these things matter. Leadership and management I've talked about. Literacy and numeracy. Curriculum has to be important. Classroom management. Can I say something about that one, please? Classroom management. If we've got teachers who cannot manage a classroom, you all know nothing will take place as far as learning goes. I work with teachers. Sometimes it takes me less than 30 seconds to walk into a classroom and know if a teacher has classroom management. Students should not run the classroom, a teacher should. So all of you teachers here, my educators, when you're working with the brand new teachers, help them learn how to manage a classroom. They can't manage a classroom, nothing happens. It's disaster. Okay? Conflict management, assessment, and these are all the areas of teacher training we have to make sure are in place to help our young people be the best they can be in our schools, okay? Now, we have to develop a pedagogy of care. And care does not mean just giving students hugs or pats on the back. That's not the kind of care I'm talking about. It means loving students in the most profound ways. Loving students, that's something we don't talk about in education. If you don't do this work because you love your students, then you should not be doing it. Okay? We're talking about through love that we have high expectations, great support, and rigorous demands of our students. That's the way you show a student that you love him or her. You don't show students love by allowing them to do what they want to do when they walk into a school. That's not love. That's a passport to failure. Okay? This pedagogy of care means that within the context of schools, teachers have genuine respect, high expectations, and great admiration for their students. If you don't have those, then you're in the wrong profession. And you may have to have some courageous conversation with some of your colleagues about maybe they're in the wrong profession. A pedagogy of care is tied to the idea that you have to believe in children in every way imaginable. This is hard work because you all know sometimes you're not just a teacher, you're also a social worker, you're like a psychologist, you're like a parent, you have to play a nurse at times, you wear multiple hats because you care about your students. You think about them like your own children. That's what we need more of, okay? Angela Valenzuela said, caring is when everyone reaches out to students, everyone in the building. Doesn't matter what your title is. If you're an adult in a school building, you can care for a student. You can be a custodian. You can be the janitor. You can work in the kitchen. Doesn't matter what you do. Caring is when everyone reaches out to students. Caring is when schools have fair and consistent policies and practices. We have this problem in the States where we consistently suspend and kick out black boys and brown boys. Same kind of behavior we see from some of the white and Asian boys, and we don't give them the same kind of punishment, right? So there's something around how racism still plays out in our schools. Caring is when administrators and staff have an understanding of the student's home culture. I maintain, look, folks, we cannot effectively teach students that we do not know. Get to know your students. Build rapport with them, meaningful relationships. All these factors make a difference. And make sure there's a culturally and language-sensitive curriculum. Young people are telling us every single day that they have a hard time learning when the curriculum is boring, when the curriculum has nothing to do with them, doesn't talk about their experiences, doesn't talk about what they have an interest in. This is when caring happens, when we put these things in place within the school context, okay? Part of what we know is when kids go into schools that look like this, the message is that we don't care. We had spent a project where we had kids take pictures of their schools to tell us why they don't like going to school. The girls said, we don't like going to the stalls because there's no toilet paper there for us to use, right? There's no doors on the stalls. That's a message that tells us that we don't care about you, and we wonder why they're angry. We wonder why they're frustrated because we send them to schools that look like this. And not only do we send them to schools that are not up to par, but then we also throw in their face what the other children have that are only 5 to 10 miles away from them. So we say, not only do we think that you're not worthy, but we think that other students are worthy, and these are their schools. 5 miles away. 5 miles away. This is a secondary school, right? How do we tell children that everybody has the same chance in life when we send them to different schools that look completely different? If this is your school, would you want to come every day? Yeah, I would show up early if I could and stay late, right? This is a place where you feel like you are cared for, clean, orderly, spacious. 5 miles away. Kids see this, they pass by this school oftentimes on their way to their school. Cafeteria, where the kids eat. What is the message that we send to our young people? That some lives are more important than others. That some people are more valuable than others. Right? Dr. Bernard said it best, right? When we make it clear that we have the valuable versus the non-valuable. The valuable go to these schools. The valuable live in these communities. The valuable go to places where we tell them every single day that you are special, you are important. We expect you to lead. We expect you to learn. So those children go to these schools and they expect themselves to be nothing short of their personal best. And we wonder why our children are upset when they have to live in circumstances that don't look like this. That's how we have to change our schools. Every child should have the right to attend schools that tells them every single day that we care about them, that gives them the supplies and the teachers and the materials and the resources that says that you matter. Telling you, the environment that you are in tells you what to ultimately believe about yourself. If all you see around you is death and destruction and hopelessness, that's what you become. And that's where our children are today, unfortunately. So now, let me move on to the next one. So what does our community have to do before I close? Community is a big part of this process. We have to get our local governments involved, right? I agree with Dr. Bernard said, look, we have to start first, but we cannot expect government to do it alone. But they should be playing a role, okay? They need to ensure that we have appreciation of urgency to address urban youth unemployment. Part of the reason why our young people don't want to go to school is because they don't see the payout. Why should I go to school? There are people in my neighborhood who have education. I can make more money selling drugs than they can, and they've got education. How can you argue with that? You got 2 college degrees, I'm a high school dropout, and I make more money than you make. Tell me why I should go to school. So we've got to give young people various realistic educational options. Youth entrepreneurship, help our young people understand it's not always about working for someone. How do you create a job where you can work for yourself? Our young people have ideas they bring every single day to school of how they would do things. Part of what I maintain is that we have a lot of young men who are selling drugs in our communities, and we've got to find ways to stop that because of the negative kinds of things that happen from that. But part of what we have to understand, and this is the conversation we don't want to have, some of these young men, 16, 17 years old, are running major drug operations. That takes what? That takes some intelligence. That takes business skills. That takes entrepreneurship skills. How can you tell me this young man can't do math? But yet he's running a business where he's making tens of thousands of dollars over the course of months. So the issue is it's not about their capacity because they show they have it. We just have to redirect that talent in more productive, more thoughtful ways. So when we talk about opening businesses, we cannot think that these young people cannot do it because they're doing it every single day. Challenges to unemployment are very clear, right? Uncertain, declining economies, lack of skills among youth, the diminished capacity of the public sector to cater to youth employment. Part of what we've been trying to tell our companies, look, you need to invest in our young people because this is your future workforce. If they're not educated, then your businesses do not thrive. If they don't have income, they cannot support your businesses. So the sustainability and self-employment to the youth sector, lack of recognition of youth as a resource. Part of what we'll have to understand, our young people are our future. We don't invest in them today, we will all pay the price tomorrow. Okay, I want to say it one more time. We don't invest in them today, we will fail tomorrow. We will need doctors to take care of us. Right? We will need old folks, nursing homes where folks can take care of us. If we don't do this with our young people, then what do we expect to happen 10, 20, 30 years down the line from now? So what are some solutions? What can government do? Educational programs have to be all over the place. Profit, nonprofit, non-governmental organizations, government organizations. We have to find educational programs that stress vocational training, job training. We have to have programs that have child care supports because what we know is that many of our young girls have children that they have to care for. So we cannot have a program that helps a young child but tell that child, you know what, you have to figure out what to do with your child. That's not going to work for her. School we work with back in New York in the States, one of the best programs around, it's a program for young parents. Daycare on the premises. You come, you drop off your children, then you get the job training that you need. Job training is free. Child care is free. This is where the government can help and step up. We cannot tell young people because you have a child that your life is ended. We still have to invest in these young people. Literacy programs. We have a big problem in the United States that we don't want to talk about. We have a growing number of young people who are not literate, who become adults who are not literate. And that's a big problem. people as big as me, I see it in schools all the time, who can't read beyond a second or third grade reading level. Big problem. We need adult literacy programs to help young adults learn how to read and write so they can fill out applications. Now, how do we do that? This earned income tax credit, part of what governments can do for companies that hire young adults, to give them tax credits, right? It's a win-win. For companies that hire young people who are coming out of jail or prison, give them tax credits. We have to incentivize ways for companies and corporations to invest in our young people. That's where our community agencies can be important. Again, schools can do everything they can do, home can do everything they can do, but it helps to have government also play a role at the same time. Housing subsidies, right? Housing can be expensive, as we all know. Housing subsidies for young people who are back in school and on track trying to make the most out of their lives. And supplemental food assistance programs. We talked about the fact that we have some young people who come to us every single day without food to eat. Help those young people have at least a decent meal once a day. Ideally 2-3 times a day, at least once a day. These are solutions that can help to keep people out of poverty. What we see in the States and what we see in some communities across the world, and I'm sure you see it here in Trinidad, is this generational poverty. Generational poverty, right? Where generation after generation, folks cannot move out of poverty. And we're talking about folks who have worked hard, folks who have sacrificed. And you got young people who are no better off than their parents were, no better off than their grandparents were, no better off than where their great-grandparents were. And you wonder why young people wonder if school is something they should do, because they see time and time again that people are trying to get out of poverty but cannot get out. So let me get ready to close, okay? So again, partnerships between community organizations and youth is absolutely important. We have to help train linkages between the formal and the informal sectoring, partnering to encourage and enable employment of young graduates. We want young people to feel like when they graduate, there's work opportunities for them, and provide models of attachment, internship strategies to encourage national and municipal levels of support. These are strategies that we have to put pressure on our government to begin to enact. Let me talk about one last thing before I finish. In Los Angeles, where I am, we have an initiative called the Bloom Initiative. What we were facing was a large number of black and brown males who were incarcerated. And when they would come out of incarceration, they would reoffend and go back in. We've got about an 85% what's called recidivism rate, right? So they go into jail, they come back out, and they get right back in trouble again. And the vicious cycle continues. So we started this initiative back in 2012. What we do is that we're trying to reach black males between the ages of 14 and 18 who are residents of South Los Angeles who have been incarcerated. When they are incarcerated, when they are released, they come and they work with 7 different community-based organizations. These organizations help them find ways to get back in school. Everyone is assigned a mentor. A mentor helps you get back in school. The mentor also helps you develop job training skills. Some of these young men are homeless, so they oftentimes help them provide housing. And the idea is if you find supports for these young men, you can significantly reduce the chances that they will reoffend. We just finished the first year. 95% of our young men that we've worked with have not reoffended after the first year. Goes to show you when you reinvest in young people, you give them the supports, it makes a difference. So part of what we're hoping to do is by the end of 5 years, we're hoping to impact close to 5,000 young men. It's not the end of the world, but it's a start. You can get 5,000 young men who are not incarcerated, who are not on drugs, who are not in gangs. Then we have a better chance to have responsible, upstanding young men who can be a contribution to our communities and to their families. So we're optimistic that this kind of program we need to model. We need to expand. We need to put our resources into young people so that they can become more self-sufficient. Now, you have to find out who are your key stakeholders. You have stakeholders here, your teachers, your principals, your students, parents, your ministry, housing assemblies, examination bodies, employees, teaching service committee. Find your stakeholders. Work collectively, not against each other. Find your stakeholders to say, how do we work collectively to reach these goals? Our young people are begging for help. They're asking for intervention. They're pleading for support. We have to find out who our key stakeholders are to make this situation work. The challenge is to end poverty, help the poorest escape extreme poverty. If we can just help the bottom 5% of our countries, it would change the entire face of what our countries look like. Just the bottom 5%, right? We help the bottom 5%, it changes the entire structure of our social structure. ensure that moderately the poor have a chance to climb. Part of what our young people feel like they don't have is hope. When people do not have hope, there's no way to help them to think and act in rational ways, okay? So we have to give them developmental assistance and help remove the barriers that prevent them from being self-actualized, okay? And as I close, I want to close with a quote from Dr. King, who said that cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And there comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but one must take it because one's conscience tells one that it is right. That is the spirit we have to have when it comes to doing what we have to do on behalf of our young people. It's not going to be easy. There's going to be pitfalls along the way. There's going to be challenges. We have to do this because it's the right thing to do. We have a moral responsibility, a moral obligation, an ethical accountability structure to make sure we do what's right on behalf of our young people. They are our future. Our future hangs in the balance as long as we continue to turn our backs on our young people. So I want to plead to you, I want to beg for you to continue to dig deep, to continue to work hard, continue to do all the things that you have been doing to make our situation for our young people better. I know you get frustrated. I know you get beat down. I know you oftentimes feel tired, but it's the price that we all have to pay because our young people's futures and their lives are at stakes. So thank you all for being a wonderful audience, and I look forward to the conversation we have afterwards.